Hello, everybody. If there's one thing that the recent story about, I'm going to start again, Deesha. Hello, everybody. Start one more time. Hello, everybody. If there's one thing that the recent circus, if that's the right word, of Joe Biden teaches us, it's about the insularity of White House culture. It seems as if the view from inside the White House and the view from outside are remarkably, profoundly different. One person who knows all too well about the insular nature of White House culture is my guest today. Deesha Dyer was the social secretary for Michelle Obama, and she's the author of a very timely new book, Undiplomatic: How My Attitude Created the Best Kind of Trouble. Deesha Dyer is joining us from Bethesda, Maryland. In the bubble, Deesha, are you surprised with this Biden story? I assume you know people still in the White House.
Yes. Well, first, thank you so much for having me on. It's really great to be here. I don't think I'm that surprised, really. I feel as if the country was ready for a shakeup, and that's what President Biden did. And so I didn't think it was going to be so soon. I thought it'd be perhaps after the election that he would probably step aside. But it's great, and we're feeling pretty good about it. So yeah.
Some people are feeling good, others, I think, a little nervous. But leaving aside that, Deesha, what about this idea that the view from inside the White House is very different from outside? You've been in that
Mhm.
peculiar institution. Um, is there an echo chamber quality to living or working inside the White House, that everyone shares values and views which may not be shared on the outside?
Yeah, and I'll say just I just want to comment on the last thing you said. I think that anybody is nervous around politics, especially if you're a Black person in America. So that nervousness never goes away. But regardless, we're still, pretty, excited about the possibility of shaking up what has always been old school American politics. And so, what I'll say about the view on the outside and the inside is completely different. You're correct. I mean, I did not realize that until I got in the inside. There are so many things and intricacies of the White House that people don't know or see simply because they don't work there, or our civics education is not up to par as it should be, or we have so many talking heads that kind of dilute and put their own spin on things that kind of get into the factual of things that happen inside the White House is sometimes kind of hard. And so I wouldn't say that everyone is aligned that is works in the White House as far as thought process and opinions and all of that. But we're aligned on the basic things of the fundamentals of making things better, equality and justice. And I think that's what threads people together. But the differing opinions is kind of what makes the progress because it represents different people around the country.
One word that I wouldn't naturally associate with somebody working within the White House, especially as a social secretary for the First Lady, is undiplomatic.
Hmm.
Um, it's obviously an undiplomatic remark of yours to speak about undiplomacy. How easy is it to be undiplomatic within the White House? I thought it was all about diplomacy, all about saying the right thing, even if you don't believe it.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think that undiplomatic is not just a political term or a term to use inside the White House. Undiplomatic also prescribes to the way that I got to the White House. It prescribes the type of person that I am, a Black woman who, did not have a college degree when I went there. So it doesn't really just speak to the diplomacy and protocol of world leaders and national security and all these things that we think about Washington. It also represents a non-traditional path. Like I didn't go the robotic path and the right path and all these things to succeed and get there. And so that is why the book is called Undiplomatic. It doesn't have much to do with, going in there and not having diplomacy or decorum or protocol. It has everything to do with the fact that I did not take the diplomatic way to get to the White House. I did not take the proper way to get there, the suited up way, the assumption. And that is why it's called undiplomatic.
Do you think, and I want to get to your story in a few minutes,
Mhm.
Deesha, but do you think that your story and the story of Michelle Obama, as she describes herself, on her X page, a girl from the South Side and former First Lady. One, those two things don't normally go together. Do you think
Mhm.
that your path and Michelle Obama's path were in some ways, and perhaps even Barack Obama's path, were quite similar?
Oh, 100%. I think that not just us three, I think there's a bunch of us out there, which I hope all the stories do get told of being, a black person in this country who people didn't think would rise to the occasion or the stature of being the president or the first lady or even the social secretary. I was only the second African American social secretary behind the first who also was for President Mrs. Obama. And so I think that our stories are, very tied and weaved together. And, we have very many similarities. But I think that, the history of the country just goes to show that there are many of us who, rise to these occasions and get to places that we never thought we'd be or that people thought they would never see. And we made it there. And so I do think they're definitely similar. And, and I think that's also what drew me to work for President and Mrs. Obama.
Barack Obama, of course, went to Harvard Law School. Michelle
Mhm,
Obama was at Harvard Law School as well as Princeton as an undergraduate. Your
mhm.
background is slightly different from theirs. Tell us
Yeah.
about yourself, where you began, and how you fell into this remarkable job of
Mhm.
social secretary for Michelle Obama.
Yeah, well, I've always been a community person. I've always been a community advocate. I've always been involved in social causes. I've always been an activist in different realms. And so it's always important for me to start off with that because even though I didn't have the prestige of the education and all of these other things that people really, perceive as like what you need for the White House, I had the undergrounding, fundamentals of like who I was, what I stood for, the community in which I served. And so for me going to college, at 17 years old wasn't really a decision that I probably should have made because I dropped out of school. And when I dropped out of university, I just worked for a number of years. I loved my life. I was a hip hop journalist and I was, working and doing great. I had my own apartment, but there was something always pulling me back to social work. And so when I went back to school when I was 28 years old, I could only go to Community College of Philadelphia because I could not get in a 4-year college. And so when I went to Community College of Philadelphia, Barack Obama started kind of running for office and started to be more popular and started constantly being on my TV. And I just found, that, everything that he was saying and everything the first lady was saying was something that I felt included me in politics for the first time. I could understand things. I didn't, knew that it didn't have to look like how it always looked like. And so that's when I started kind of being like, perhaps I could do good working, in federal government and in government. And so then I applied for a White House internship when I was 31 years old, got the internship, and then got hired slowly after that. And then worked my way up to several promotions and then ended up as the White House social secretary and worked until the last day, which is January 20th, 2017 at the White House.
You make it sound, Disha, very easy. Uh, I mean, you obviously experienced it, so I guess in your mind there's a
Mhm,
degree of inevitability.
mhm,
You know what it was like. But for a woman who, in her late 20s, early 30s, who was just coming out of community college, to even get that White House internship, let alone
mhm,
become Michelle Obama's social secretary, is quite an achievement. What is it about you? Persistence,
mhm,
ability, informality, perhaps
mhm,
lack of diplomacy?
mhm.
What distinguishes you from the many other thousands of young women and men who would have liked to have had that kind of career?
Yeah. I think that for me, it's a combination of all those things, but I think part of it was because I had been out in the working world for a number of years. And so I had experience, I think, that some other interns didn't have. And then I also, approached my application as Deesha Dyer, not Deesha Dyer who wants to work for the White House. It was like, this is what I know. I'm not going to pretend that I know policy. I'm not going to throw around big words. I'm not going to do all these things to make me seem more attractive in the eyes of the White House, but not present who I am. Because if they would have hired me off of that, I would have got there and been like, just kidding. Like I don't know any of that stuff. I just put an essay together. So I think that my authenticity and my hard work, but I think it goes back to just my community, my community activism. And I was always for the people since I was a teenager. It wasn't something that I was like, let me get a job in it or let me use it to work at the White House. It is the core of who I am. So I didn't have to be taught how to, care about people and do true activism or speak my mind. I didn't have to be taught for that. And I think that the Obamas ushered in an era in which that was welcomed. And it may have not been welcomed in other White Houses, but it was welcome to kind of be someone who spoke their mind and also someone who, worked with the team to make sure we opened up the White House and created events that represented all people. Those are fundamental things that I already had. So I just kind of leaned on those and less on what I didn't know, because the things I didn't know, I could be taught. But you can't be taught how to deeply care about people, and you can't be taught how to fight for people. It's just not, it's just it's a natural ability that you have.
Do you remember the first time you met the Obamas, Michelle and
Mhm.
Barack Obama?
I do. I do. I met them both when I was an intern. Michelle Obama, I met when she met with the intern class, and we all got individual pictures with her. And so it was a very much just shaking hands. I'm Deesha Dyer. She said, nice to meet you. And we took a group picture. So that was the first time I ever met her. And then the time I had met the president was actually on Air Force One. We were flying back from a national tragedy. And I was on Air Force One because I had got sent to Texas, where the shooting had happened on a military base, to help console the families, help with press, help set things up for the president's visit, because that's the department that I was in as an intern. And so on the way home, they flew us all home on Air Force One, and I got to meet the president on the plane, and it was just a very surreal experience of couldn't not believe I was on Air Force One, or that I was meeting President Obama face to face.
There are two views, or there's more, probably two views on Obama, but two dominant views, it seems to me. On the one hand, of course, he was a profoundly different president as an African American. On the
Mm-hmm.
other hand, he went to Harvard Law School. He surrounded himself with technocrats. He wasn't politically that radical. What view would you take from inside? How radical do you think the Obama White House was?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the word radical is up for interpretation. I mean, I'm very much an activist, and so the word radical is almost revolutionary for me. I would not say that they were revolutionary in like, wanting to overthrow things or anything like that. But I would say that in his thinking and in his thought process for the time in which he came around, which was 2007, 2008, and took office in 2009, it was a radical approach of approaching, let's overhaul healthcare. Like that was something that was tried to be done in the past so many times, and was not able to be done. And so the fact that he got that done, I feel like it was a different kind of approach. I don't know, in the sense I would call it radical, I guess, in the sense of what you're asking, but in the sense of like an activism standpoint, I don't see him as radical. But I see him as somebody who takes chances, and I see him as somebody who welcomes people and welcomes their ideas, and he stands on what he believes. He's extremely smart, so he does his homework and he uses that as his arsenal.
Michelle Obama, of course, was a particularly distinguished, popular, but also controversial first lady. What was your experience as the social secretary? Did you get involved much in politics or in policy? Or were you really just focusing on what she would wear and where she would go for lunch and all that sort of thing?
Yeah, I would say neither. And so I didn't control policy. I didn't talk about policy. That wasn't really my role at the White House. That was my role that I kind of, knew outside of the White House. But inside the White House, it was not my job to talk policy or move policy around. It was my job to get the message out about the policy to the American people, or to whoever who was watching, to set the scene for the conversations that became, the law about this or whatever else. Like, so it was my job to help, like, bring the guest in to have the conversations. It was my job to make sure they felt welcomed and to be transparent about things. And so while I didn't talk about policy or move policy, I helped set the scene for those conversations to happen, brought people around the table. And then I also did not decide like what she wore, where she went to lunch. She decided that herself. Like, she's a grown woman. So she did that herself. I basically would say, if we're having an event, what would you like to serve the guest? What time would you like it to open? What is the message that we have behind this event? Whether it's about, child nutrition, whether it is about gun violence, like we're doing this event. This is how I see it set up so we can get the message out, talk about it and whatnot. And I was kind of in the middle of those things where I didn't do policy, but I also didn't, focus on what she wore. She has a stylist. She just got, would go to her own lunches. I would just kind of set the scene for when it came to events that happen there and how can we make it so we're making sure everybody's gathered around the table. What guests can I bring in? What art can I bring in? And so that was really my role at the White House.
Sounds like the art of diplomacy rather than
Yes.
undiplomacy. What was then undiplomatic? Your new book is called Undiplomatic, How My Attitude Created the Best Kind of Trouble. What was the best kind of trouble that you created in the Obama White House?
I think the best kind of trouble was, things like, saying we should bring, formerly incarcerated people into the White House, saying that, let's bring a black gospel choir from down the street to sing for the Pope instead of the top glee club of the country. Let's say, like, let's, look at what we have around us and say, like, oh, usually this is all, white men or white women in this meeting. Let's bring some different people in here. Let's have the first transgender of color come to our, pride, celebration. And so it wasn't, again, looking at diplomacy as a protocol in Washington term, which is why we use it on the book. But that's not the way in which I'm using it. I'm using it as we broke barriers, we did ground. We weren't willing to say, oh, this is a diplomatic way to do things. Let's invite the same people to the same things and let's have stiff art and stiff music. We said this is a cultural experience that can move policy, move education, move all of these things. And that was the undiplomatic thing about me and about other people in the administration, is that I stood up and said, like, I'm not willing to have to have the same people do this. And I don't care so much as you went to Harvard. I still want to bring in the person who went to community college who has a lived experience. And so I stood up for that and I use my voice for that. And that is something in Washington that is not very much welcomed, especially from Black women in Washington, especially from Black women who have a community college degree. And so that was the undiplomatic part of me.
Did you ever take an undiplomatic step, so to speak, too far? Perhaps supporting radical groups like Hamas. I mean, back in the early 2000s, of course, Hamas wasn't as powerful. But did you make political mistakes? Did you experience defeat?
No, I didn't. No.
Nothing at all? Everything
No,
you
that, I mean,
wanted happened?
that wasn't my role. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't, you have to remember, like, now we're in 2024 where things are quite different. Back in 2009, we didn't have constant social media. We didn't have so many things that we have now. When you work at the White House, when you worked at the White House in 2008, 2009, up to probably 2012, 2013, like, you worked at the pleasure of the president, like, you worked to serve the country. So my individual thoughts and processes, I was understanding that I have to give them up a little bit, not give them up in sense of how I felt, but I couldn't take action on things. You know what I mean? Like, we had the constant killing of Black men in the country. It's not like I could be like, like, let me go to work and like overturn desk. Like, I could not, like, that wasn't a thing. I was like, what tool can I use being the White House social secretary to make sure that I bring in the right people for the conversation to talk about police brutality, to talk about gun violence. And so I never did anything like that. And I don't think I would ever do everything like that. I don't know what good could come out of me, taking political stuff too far when I knew that, what my role was in the White House.
We are speaking with Deesha Dyer, the author of Undiplomatic, her own story of working as Michelle Obama's social secretary in the Obama White House, how my attitude created the best kind of trouble. When it comes to the best kind of trouble, our sponsor, Liberties, a quarterly of culture and politics, also does a good job creating at least intellectual trouble. We're going to run a short feature on Liberties, and then I want to come back with Deesha Dyer and fast forward a little bit and talk about the 2020s and how everything has changed, or at least in her mind, how everything has changed in America. So don't go away, anyone. We'll be back in a second to talk more undiplomatic. Back in a second.
the noise, there is nuance, insight. Liberties is not just a journal of ideas, it's a meteor of intelligent substance. It's the place to be for engaged citizens. Politics, opinion, substance. Liberties is a triumph for freedom of thought. A quarterly of urgency, of cultural exploration, of intellectual delight, of immaculate prose. It's invaluable. Subscribe now or find Liberties at your favorite bookseller.
And you can subscribe to Liberties at libertiesjournal.com. We're speaking with a troublemaker, Deesha Dyer, the author of Undiplomatic, How My Attitude Created the Best Kind of Trouble. Deesha, in the first half of the show, you talked about how things were different back then. There was no social media. Now with Kamala Harris, and I want to talk a little bit about her in this second half of the show. She has, to quote the Washington Post, an online army of TikTokers on her side. How much do you think in political terms has social media changed everything since you were in the White House?
I think that social media gave us the access to be able to to express our own views and our own thoughts in ways that we perhaps didn't know how to before, to get it out to the masses. I mean, it's all these young people are just creative. I mean, everybody's just creative now using all these tools. And so I feel like, social media really helps get the word out of what we think, of what we see, of what we read. And a lot of that sometimes is negative and false information and disinformation, but a lot of it also is how people find out information. And so we have to meet that moment and not, I know I'm 46. And so sometimes I'm like, I don't know what these kids are talking about, but they're also talking to each other and they're the future of the country. And so, that's the medium that they use. And so I think it changed a lot, and I'm, wondering how much it still will change. Right. So, yeah.
When it comes to change, of course, one of the dramatic changes since the Obama White House has been the reaction. You mentioned that you pushed for incarcerated men to come into the White House, transgender teenagers, and so on and so forth. It was, to borrow a word, a radical White House, certainly in social and cultural terms. Were you aware, Deesha, did you have any idea of the potential reaction that was and would take place in America, of course, driven by Donald Trump, but also by other forces and personalities on the right wing of American politics, particularly within the Republican Party? Were you aware of the opposition to what you were doing?
I mean, 100%. I think growing up Black in America, the country is founded on slavery. So, I mean, we haven't ever been a country in which it's been an equalizer. We've never been a country in which, there's been accountability or reparations for anything that's happened. And we still deal with, we have a killing of someone this week, Sonia Massey, who died at the hands of a police officer being shot in the face. And so we live with this all the time. So I definitely am not surprised that there are racists out there or people that oppose, people just living their lives and being how they want to be and minding their business. And, and so it doesn't surprise me at all. I don't think anything at this point at my age in this country surprises me.
What about the overt racism? We did a show last week about the growth of neo-Nazi groups. Of course, in Charlottesville a few years ago, there were young men on the street wearing Nazi uniforms. Does that surprise you? And how does that? How do we contextualize that within the narrative of the Obama presidency? Are they in some ways connected? Is one a reaction against the other?
I think that what I would say is that it does not surprise me. I mean, these are just people that are now showing their faces and being verbal. I mean, in some cases, they're still cowards and not showing their faces, but they're now being verbal and upfront about how they feel about people, about Black people, about trans people, about whoever. But these are people that have been hiding in plain sight, the teachers, the nurses, the law enforcement, like all the aggressions that have ever been, these subtle nuances against people of color or other marginalized people. Like, we know that they exist. Like, it doesn't surprise me now that they felt like because Donald Trump, became president, that they now had a protector and they now will get out of jail for storming the Capitol. I mean, none of that surprises me because we live in a country, once again, that is constantly exuding this behavior. And I think that, Barack Obama being president definitely, I think, lit a flame, for sure, because now they're more scared of that their power or their whatever, the supremacy might be taken over. And so it's like, how do we react with our egos to protect our families or whatever else they feel like is being taken? And it's all off of fear and it's all off of ignorance and racism. But I can't, I'm more about protecting and defending Black people than I am worrying about, what the hell they're doing, to be honest. So, yeah.
I mentioned Kamala Harris earlier. Of course, everyone is mentioning Kamala Harris this week. She's running now for president. She's the current vice president of the United States. She's half African-American, or certainly I think half West Indian, half Indian, a woman of color. Is the Harris attempt to win the White House, is this the second chapter of the Obama presidency in a sense, or is it something quite different?
Yeah, I would say for number one, her name is Kamala, so it's Kamala. And what I would say is no, it's not a second chapter. I think that she's writing her own chapter. Our chapter of the presidency has closed, and she is writing her own chapter. And thank goodness for that, because that's what we left office 7 years ago, and a lot has changed in 7 years. And so it is exciting and refreshing to see what she will do, and and how the country will change, and the ways in which she will carve out her own legacy. She already has as the first African American vice president, first Indian vice president. And so I don't think it's a continuation at all. I think Kamala has her own legacy to live and her own chapter to write. Barack Obama's chapter, obviously, in legacy, I think was wonderful because I was obviously lived it. But at the same time, I recognize that it's time for it's always time to reset and to have a new outlook and a refreshing outlook on things. And I think that's what she's going to do.
She's raised an enormous amount of money already. Millions, tens of millions, perhaps hundreds of millions of dollars are now flowing into her coffer. There seems to be a great deal of enthusiasm for her, which perhaps didn't exist before Biden's resignation or announcement that he wouldn't seek a second term. Do you expect her to win the election? Do you think some people think she has a very good chance? Others have written her off. What's your sense?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there was enthusiasm for her before. I think that now we're just seeing it come full term that we're seeing her running for president, and I do think she'll win. You know what I mean? As I think that she'll win, and I can't. I'm hoping that other people in America agree that the opposition in which we have is just not great. But not only that, but she is the best for our country at this time, and so I'm hoping that people will agree with that. But of course, I think she's going to win, and it does me no good to speak otherwise. So yeah.
The tenor of the country, though, it seems to have changed. John McCain famously defended Barack Obama, one of his critics, and he famously said he's a good man, a family man. I somehow doubt that Donald Trump would do that with Harris. How much has the tenor of the country, in your view, changed since Obama became president in the two elections that he won versus the election today between Trump and Harris?
I mean, I think it's changed very much. I mean, I don't, as in my lifetime, and I'm 46, and so maybe people can discuss before that, but in my lifetime, I've never seen such visceral violence, and convictions of a felon possibly being president, and then like just racist dog whistles and all of these things. I've never seen those happen, in this country at the highest office of the land. Of course, I've seen it in different places, but not the highest office of the land. So I think that the tenor of the country has definitely changed. And I think that, people are also getting sick of that. And people are understanding that, like, that's not the way to go. That's not moving us forward. And that's wrong on, every level possible. And so I'm hoping that they come out to the polls, to say that. But it's not just about the presidential election. We also have a House and a Senate, and we have issues that are on our ballot, so it's not just about the presidency. It's also just about the health and welfare of all of us at all different levels. And so, the tone has definitely changed, and I'm hoping that we can, I don't think it'll change back, to be honest with you, but I think that, those people can hopefully that are saying what they need to say, and Donald Trump can just go in a corner somewhere and we'll never hear from them again.
What kind, if she wins, what kind of presidency would you like to see? Somewhere, Deesha, there may be a young man or woman who, like you, will become the White House social secretary, perhaps for the first man, perhaps for Harris herself. What kind of administration would you like, and what advice would you give people, particularly young people, whose dream it is to go and work in a Harris White House?
Yeah, I think that the kind of White House that I would love to see is one that continues the conversation of liberation of all people. One that has, one that says, we're going to talk about and bring people to the table that are, abolitionists, people that have, issues with war, people that have, things they want to say about, trans rights and Black rights and all these things. And we're going to listen to them and put in accountability and consequences for people that kind of, break these things that we want to see. I think I want a White House that is open and a White House that's up for conversation, but also a White House that's accessible, one that will, anybody can look at it and look at, the briefings or anything else, and they can understand what we're talking about. That was one of the things at the White House that's important for people to understand is like, we would come out with these really great, policies or laws or different, declarum, and it's like, nobody understood what they meant. And so I hope that there's this one of accessibility where we see, a more clear view of what government is. And I think that the advice I give to young people is just go for it. I mean, like, go for, working there, apply for the internship, apply for the job, enjoy your experience, know that you're part of history, continue to lean into the curiosity of, what you want to do. I didn't go to the White House with plans of getting promoted 3 times or even staying to the end, but I was so curious and loved so much of what I was doing that it kept leading me to other opportunities. And so I think that's what I would tell people. But I would also say the White House is amazing, but so is your local government. So is the Capitol Hill. So look at those two as options of ways to get involved in being a public servant on the federal level.
Finally, Deesha, is there any profound unfinished business left over from the Obama administration? Used the R word earlier, reparations. It's a controversial subject. We've done a number of shows on it. If there is a Harris White House, if she wins the election, would you, for example, like her to pursue reparations when it comes to slavery or some other major social political initiative which has scared previous administrations?
100%. I think that that's what evolution is all about. It's about evolving to a point that we can kind of tackle things that we were too afraid of or too bullied in the corner or to do. And I think that as, a woman, a Black woman, Indian woman who is now running for president, she shows that she is not scared to tackle some of these topics. So not just reparations, but also land back for Native Americans. Like there needs to be some things that we are not afraid to do anymore because we're going to hurt people's egos or we're going to hurt livelihoods or whatever people think. But none of these conversations need to be had because it needs to be justice. If we're going to be a country that really focuses on justice, we can't say, let's pick and choose what justice we're going to decide to focus on. And we're going to pick the things that are the easiest. No, but they all need to be tackled. And so I'm hoping that reparations and land back are also things that they talk about, and that they move on, when she wins. I don't think that Donald Trump will ever talk about these things. He does not care. So I'm hoping that, these are some radical things and revolutionary things and evolutionary things, but that can only be done in cooperation with the people.
Are you available, Deesha, if some of the Harris people are watching this and think we need an undiplomatic troublemaker like this in the White House?
I'm always in the background. I would not go back to the White House, but I'm always in the background to be of service and to be of help. But it's definitely time for other new people to step up and to bring their ideas to the table. I'm always around to help any community, any people that want to make things better, whether it's the president or whether it's the city council in my town.
Well, Deesha Dyer, the author of Undiplomatic, How My Attitude Created the Best Kind of Trouble. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you so much.
And I'll have to get you back on the show to talk more Harris. I'm nervous now to mention her first name, Deesha. How do I pronounce it?
So it's comma, like you don't have a comma.
Kamala, not Kamala.
Kamala.
Okay, well,
I'll try
and get
the
it right
punctuation
next time you're
comma.
on.
Perfect.
Kamala, not Kamala.
Yes, it's Kamala, like the abbreviation
Kamala, well, if you're
comma
watching,
and love.
I hope you're not insulted.
No,
Deesha
I'm sure
Dyer,
she's not.
at least I got your name right. Thank you so
You
much.
did.
And we'll
You
get you
did.
back on the show in the not too distant future, hopefully when Harris wins the election. Thank you so
Yes.
much.